So good afternoon. So we are very happy to have all of you after lunch. I think I can guarantee the fact that it's not going to be a boring session. I've been told that there'll be an interactive session. This is going to be an interactive session. And we would want all your attention and your feedback along the presentation. So so it's going to be four panelists who will be presenting to us. And starting off, we have Laura. She's from the Department of Graphic Design from the School of Art at Virginia Commonwealth University. And she's going to talk to us on uncovering the ATF, that is American Type Found Archives at the Smithsonian Institute. So over to you.
Oh, great. Okay. Is my mic on? Oh, excellent. Okay, cool. Thank you all for showing up. It's good to see you all. I know some of you I've already had a chance to talk to. Yeah, I think kind of as an introduction, this is going to be really less about me and really more about you. So obviously this is not my work, but I'm really interested in your impressions really of this archive, what you think is useful in this archive, and really what's interesting. So in some ways, what I've been doing is I have access to the archives. It's taken me, to be honest, it's taken me years to gain access. Part of it was related to the pandemic. Part of it is just related to the way that the Smithsonian is working through their archives. And so because I have access, I'm really interested in trying to open access to you all. So that's kind of as a way of starting it. In some ways, this is kind of an easy presentation for me because I'm not talking about myself that much, but it's a challenging presentation because I know that there's a lot of you in the audience that has a lot more information than I do about ATF, about the archives, about the history of ATF. So yeah, so bear with me if I misstep at all. So the first thing to say is that, as I mentioned, I have access to the archives, and so, yeah, these are the original drawings that were collected when ATF closed. All of their drawings, matrices, type, all that stuff was set up to auction. So it went to many different places. Stan Nelson, who was the curator at the time, who was a printmaker, was able to purchase a large portion of these drawings, matrices, type, a lot of stuff. And he had that, Stan had that way out in Suitland. So when I moved from Massachusetts to Virginia, there was a designer in Massachusetts who I don't see in the audience, but he said, yeah, Laura, go down and check out Stan Nelson and the archives there. So that was 20 years ago when I started at VCU, and it's taken me that long to get back into there. So I'll talk a little bit about where the archive is. That's me, so feel free to contact me with any information, any thoughts, any desires you have about the collection. So there you go. So if you've been to Washington, D.C., and you've been to the Smithsonian, so the Smithsonian Institution is paid for by taxpayer funds, as I understand it, which means that it belongs to us. So unlike many other museums, they're all free. Most of them are free that are part of the institution. So if you go to the mall, you'll see these large institutions. The Museum of American History is this building in the foreground. So it's this huge structure out on the mall. So the archives are not there. If you were to source through the database online, this is where the problem starts, because this is where they've been documented. So for all purposes, it's kind of a sheet of paper that's sort of in parallax, and it really doesn't give us the information that we have. So as Stephen Coles has kind of reiterated, that's a lot of the problems with these archives, is that this is how they've been documented, and it's really kind of useless for us. They're cataloged, so at least we know that they exist, but for our purposes, they're really useless, and that's kind of where the problem starts. Okay, so when Stan acquired the collection, he put everything in the database. And so it's actually kind of cool because you can go through and you can see where things came from, of course, who the designer is. And a lot of these annotations some of them come from Benton, some of them come from Stan, so they're from various places. So that became kind of interesting, and again, I can make accessible to you as well. So the kind of the beginning of cataloging is also kind of the beginning, at least, of documenting that this archive exists. So yeah, those are pretty cool. And they're kind of fun to read.
It was a cursive type.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, it's really enjoyable reading. Okay, so this is not the archive, but so to get to the archive, and it is actually kind of funny because, so I met the curator at the mall, and then we ride the bus out to Silver Spring, and when you get off the bus, it's all these warehouses, and it's almost like you're on the back lot of a Hollywood set. So you see, and it looks like this, and then you see signs that say, and I kid you not, careful artifact crossing. And so you don't know what's coming. I wanted to photograph that, but I think I was prohibited from photographing. I'm not really sure why. So I couldn't, so I had to download this from Shutterstock. So, but this is kind of what it looks like. You head out there and there's all these different warehouses. And then you go in these warehouses, and again, it's like Raiders of the Lost Ark. And there's all these amazing, as my husband said, he's a violin maker, there's a lot of woodworkers out there. So there's all these amazing artifacts, and they're in these huge cartons. This would be a scroll saw. There's, a cello. So there's just like rows and rows and rows of this. And it's a little bit larger, like going into an IKEA warehouse. So if you can imagine, that's kind of what it's like. So I walked in there, and there were 3 banks of file cabinets about this high. On each cabinet, there was these. So just to kind of give you a little bit of sense about my first access. We got there around 10:30, and I've got pages and pages and pages of this stuff, and probably about 30 drawers full of drawings. And so I'm kind of racing through this and opening up drawers. So what I'm going to show you is my effort to photograph what I could, keeping in mind this is in a warehouse. These where I had no control over lights. I just wanted to be able to photograph these, because for me to be able to open these drawers and see these drawings, it's like seeing kind of the breath of being in the warehouse. And I guess that's what I find really exciting about these drawings. It's like, to me, it's like seeing a record of these kind of human beings who are drawing these things. So I'm going to show them. It's less about what I think is really exciting and beautiful about them, and more really about what you think is really exciting about this stuff. So here we have sheets and sheets of this, and I can also make this accessible to you as well. So as I said to a couple people I've talked to, I have 2 more trips in June, 2 more days. I'm going to go back into the archives. And if anybody is interested in having me photograph something that's in this, I'd be happy to photograph it for you. Talk about that in a second, just about then how to photograph them. So that's another question. And again, for those of you who are late, what I'm hoping to do is show this stuff, talk less about what I think and more really about what you think and what you'd like to see happen with this archive. So again, lots and lots of pages of stuff. Okay, so I'm going to introduce this by showing the challenges of trying to document this stuff. So if you've already seen them in a warehouse, I've got warehouse lights, I've got shadows everywhere, including my own. So for a lot of these photographs, you're going to see my shadow. And believe it or not, I've already gone into Photoshop with these and tried to make them at least so they're accessible. So, so that's going to be the problem. So let me see. I guess the first thing I have in my notes is how not to document an historic document. So in some ways, this lecture is a little bit about how not to do that. Sorry about that. Okay, So one of the things about these drawings, which I found really exciting, is that all these handwritten notes about that. So there's all these annotations. I know that there's a real interest in looking into the employment records, I guess at Monotype, noticing that there are a lot of women who are working in these factories. So from what Stephen Coles has told me, that it's possible that there are women who are actually, Stephen here, who are actually creating sometimes italic versions or bold versions of some of these fonts. So that becomes interesting. A lot of these are really just this record of when they were drawn, when they were traced. So these sheets are, I don't know if I'm being photographed. The sheets themselves are roughly like 18 by 24, 24 by 36. They're large drawings. So that gives you a little bit of context. So for a lot of these drawings, you'll actually see the drawing, and then you'll see the tracing on the back. Most of them do not have the tracing on the back, but you'll see that for many of these. So that's one of the drawings with the tracing. And then there's the original drawing itself. So all of these drawings will have, off to the left, the title, this is America Expanded Condensed, or Extra Condensed, sorry. And you can see comments about when it was traced, a couple notes. I know you can't read that now, but again, I'm happy to make any of these available to anybody who's really interested in that. So I'll run through that. It's America Extra Condensed. So again, I'm just pulling open these drawers and photographing these glyphs that to me I found really beautiful and exciting to look at. Again, there's the database I can share with you. So apologizing for my shadow, the best I was able to do is at least photograph these so at least they were square up so that I could actually get a sense of the glyph itself. So another example of American text with my shadow. A lot of these you can go through and see some of the erasure lines where you can see where they've been kind of redrawing these things. Yeah, I just find it really exciting to be able to kind of revisit what these things looked like before they were cast and printed. And so that's another interest of mine, is that I know for a lot of revivals they're pulling from printed samples, but that's so much far removed from these original drawings. And so to me that's kind of an exciting thing to be able to go back to these. You know, again, just beginning to be able to see some of the details in these things, looking at the angles, seeing how a lot of these are much more intuitive than maybe some of us think when we're building our systems out. So those things, I think, become pretty exciting to see. Again, American text. So this is actually kind of a cool drawing because we've got that 3's been scribbled out, that 3 has been voided. And you kind of wonder, it's like, well, what didn't they like about them? They're kind of cool, I think. And so the other thing is that you begin to see kind of the thinking process behind this, which I think for those of us who work digitally, that all gets lost. And there's something about being able to see this thought process in this analog document, which, you know, to me is like, these are the human beings who built these things. And I find that pretty exciting. So kind of a close-up of that. You know, again, another voided X for whatever reason. Not really clear. I mean, there's a lot of questions about these. Is like, who's marking them, who's recording them, who's determining whether that fits with the system or not. And this is all kind of sort of lost information. As I said to some of you, so this is kind of an aside. My husband is a violin maker, and so he works in the classical tradition. So what he works from is, Strad Magazine has been really kind to produce these posters which have all of the measurements of the different plates of the violin, with also the shape of the outline. And every violin, of course, is really different. So looking at like Strad or Guarneri, some of the Italian masters. And what he does is he builds his mold based on these patterns, based on these really perfectly photographed drawings. And so I think in some ways the correlation there is beginning to look at how some of these ways of thinking about structure and thinking about form maybe we can pull from these drawings in a way that we don't maybe understand as much since we're all so completely digital. And so that, I think, is kind of interesting that I've been exploring as well. He's been looking at things like the F-hole, for example. It's like, how do you determine, how do you draw an F-hole, how do you carve an F-hole when, in fact, it's photographed head-on, but in fact, it's a curved body. And so looking at those kind of things, thinking about how you go from a drawing to then a completed three-dimensional object is also, I think, kind of an interesting thing to sort of play with the idea on that. So again, a close-up, still American text. Another example of a glyph that somehow, for some reason, was rejected. The other thing that is also really informative with these is to begin to see these variations, right? Things that we don't see as much when we're building our digital system out. We see how the 6-point and the 8-point have different proportions for their descenders. So those things to me are really pretty extraordinary to be able to see. Some of these little details, you know, again, even just here we have announcement italic with the DGHT, the way those are kind of drawn out. So even beginning to kind of look at some of the labels and maybe beginning to see different handwritings or different kinds of handwriting. So whether that's like a personal signature or not. Parsons, these to me were really pretty cool. So there's a note that says special for 14-point with the drawings labeled Norwood in this pile. So a couple of things sometimes you'll see is a font that's labeled one thing and then they change the name on it. So this is kind of an interesting one. Is it Parsons or Norwood? Was it originally Norwood and then did it become Parsons? You know, again, for all of you designers there, is just beginning to look at things like, you know, how does that structure and the overshoot, how is that constructed? Just beginning to look at like serif structures, curve structures. I mean, this is the stuff that, you know, we find really exciting. And the first time I looked at these, I think, you know, what do? We move like points, little units around, and we pull handles up and down. And so to begin to think of these less as points and handles, less as Bezier curves, and more of this kind of articulated, kinesthetic experience. Like, it's such a different way of thinking about type design. So that's kind of the stuff I think about. And then, of course, we have the Z. Yeah, I know, it's really beautiful. It's kind of like here we are in Paris, and you walk past and you see all these just beautiful bakeries, and this is kind of like looking at a type bakery or something. Again, this is Parsons. And then this is the F there. So some of these really hard to photograph, but just being able to, you know, just kind of begin to study is what is that structure like? How does that compare to the thins? You know, where would I put the point if that were my construction? So part of it is also beginning to look at, like, how would we translate that if we were to want to translate that? You know, how would that reshape how we think about our construction or not? Those are some of the questions I have. It's announcement Roman, announcement italic, and then an example of that. Baskerville italic. So this just really cool looking at these things is like, Baskerville, how many times over the past, like, I'm having to go backwards to think how long I've been setting type, and it's like 4 decades. How many times have I used Baskerville and not really seen it or looked at it quite this way? So that's pretty kind of exciting and cool. You know, just even looking at, you know, the serif structures, like, well, I never really thought of Baskerville italic as having kind of that sort of structure. And then beginning to look at, like, the structure on the throat and how is that different from that serif. I mean, those are kind of interesting things to begin to look at. So Baskerville italic. I wish there were more of those. There were just a couple sheets in that folder. Bank Gothic light condensed, which I thought was pretty interesting as well. You know, so again, any of you are interested, I'm happy to share these lists with you. If there's anything in there you would like me to photograph, I could do it the best that I can, because I'm going back into the warehouse. So this is kind of my effort to at least kind of photograph, document what I'm seeing, things that are interesting to me. I thought this is kind of curious just in terms of looking at kind of the proportions. That just caught my eye. Just a couple of little details, even just, I mean, this is probably, again, talking to an audience where extremely knowledgeable and having a lot more knowledge than I do, is just beginning to look at things like, you know, the structure of that related to that. They just feel more intuitive than I think when we're building things out digitally. It's kind of my impression. It's another Baskerville italic. Again, really cool. Of course, when we when we work on cues, like how many weeks have I been working on the tail of my cue? So it's really cool just to kind of see how this has been drawn and then redrawn. So that's pretty cool to see. And then to see like different sizes, how those really begin to shape up. Another example of Baskerville italic. So yeah, these are all just kind of records of like that thought process, which is, yeah, it's kind of thrilling to see these things. So that, you know, you can see the E and the F, of course, the relationship between the two, and how they're built off each other. More Baskerville italic. I lied. I've got a lot more than I thought I did. So, yeah, you know, here we have three different sizes there, this, 6, 9, and 16. We have dates when it was traced. There's lots of other annotations, a lot of that. To be honest, I don't really know what it means. There's a lot of different kind of numbers, different proportions, things that I'm not that familiar with. But these are all just kind of embedded in these drawings. Yeah, I just find them really, really beautiful. So a little close-up of that. So these are, again, I'm not sure what this means, but I'm wondering if somebody else in the audience does. And here we have, it's 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. And then there's all sorts of things like 13 and a half dig. So there's lots of different kind of annotations about proportions and numbers, which is again kind of stuff I think about when I'm looking at those the drawings and the reference drawings, posters for violins. So yeah, and I just think a lot of stuff goes without saying. I mean, you're all like typographers and type designers. You see stuff that they're just really cool because they're different. They're like 3 really different G's. And I just think that's really fascinating. So yeah, just kind of a record of that, a record of this thinking, you know, in the way that you can kind of reshape, change the proportions a little bit, you know, without kind of pointing out all the details that I'm sure you all see, is just, you know, things like thick-thin relationships. How does that change when we're looking at different sizes? How does the proportions? And this is all stuff that they're thinking about when they're hand drawing them. So another close-up of those G's. Benton. So original drawings from Benton. I know, cool. Yeah. They're just so cool. I don't know how my time is, so I'll keep going. Bernard Modern Book Italic. There's a lot of Bernard Modern. Again, just a lot more Bernard. Lots of Bernard. It's Bernard Modern, bold italic. And another Bernard Modern, bold italic. Bernard Gothic light. Yeah, that's kind of cool. It's like, ooh, why didn't they like that R? And the K, that's been voided. Bodoni bull condensed. Or Bodini, as one of my students once said. Yeah, so some of them have these interesting annotations. How am I doing for time? I'm done? Yeah. All right, I'm going to race through the rest then. Yeah, so this was Stationer's Gothic that became Canterbury. Can I just go through the West quickly? And then there we go. So I'm happy to share any of this with anybody. So because we were like, if it's 15 minutes, or is that a half hour? That was a half hour? Holy Toledo. Okay, sorry. Oh my God, that went so fast. I love these. This is London. Okay, London. Check out that hairline. Right? Isn't that cool? Oh, I just think that's so cool. I think these are just really beautiful. I'm going to end it with us. I mean, not like everything isn't so beautiful, but yeah. Okay, sorry I took up the whole half hour.
No worries. Thank you so much. I'm sure we could go on. And thank you, Laura, for taking us to the archives. And I think you actually took us to the French bakeries. And I could hear John Berry's going, It was actually making more sense of, I'm sure everybody did enjoy. Thank you. And I will not proceed with any questions because we are short of time. And we'll move on to the next speaker.